This video tutorial is compatible with Photoshop CC and Photoshop CS6. In this project we're going to move this truck and its shadow into a new location. The idea with this project is that we preserve the original shadow rather than having to create one from scratch. Okay, now we can make a selection of the truck, but this project file, if we go over to the Paths panel, we'll see there's a path already being created, which makes fast work of creating this selection. All I need to do is just right click and choose Make Selection. I'm going to choose a 0.5 pixel radius here and then select OK. We now need to check that this selection is OK by coming to the Select menu and choosing Refine Edge. Now from the View menu I can choose to view this on white or on black to check the edge quality to make sure there's no pixels from the old background still visible. Okay, so let's just zoom in. I'll just use the Command spacebar or Control spacebar on a PC and then just move around the edge looking for any areas which still contain some of the old background pixels. Okay, this is quite an accurate selection it seems. If we do see any of the old background pixels, then we can just use the Shift Edge slider just to contract that mask in a small amount and then select OK. Okay, I'll come over to the Layers panel now and we're going to add a layer mask to this background layer. I'm going to convert this background layer into a smart object. Come down to Filter, Convert for Smart Filters, and then we'll click on the Add Layer Mask icon to add a layer mask to this image. I'm just going to do Command 0 or Control 0 on a PC to fit in view once again. Okay, I'm going to hold down the Command key now on a Mac or the Control key on a PC and click on this layer mask to load that selection one more time. I'm now going to hold down the Shift key and click on this layer mask to disable it. We're now going to come in and select a levels adjustment. This levels adjustment we can use to hide the old background surrounding the shadow. Okay, I'm just going to come down to the layers panel here. We're going to need to invert this layer mask. I could have inverted the selection prior to creating the mask, but now I can invert the mask instead just by going Command I or Control I on a PC to ensure that we have white surrounding the truck, and it's the truck that's masked from this adjustment. Okay, let's return to that levels dialog. I'm now going to clip the lighter tones to white. If we hold down the Alt key or Option key on a Mac and drag that white input slider, we'll see the areas that we're clipping to white. Now the idea is to clip all of the areas surrounding the shadow to white but leave the shadow intact. Okay, so that's about there. Okay, and we can then let go of the mouse and knowing that the areas around that shadow are now white. Okay, we'll see that the shadow is going a little bit blue and it's also a little bit light, so we can actually modify the density of that shadow by clicking on the gamma slider and then moving that down to the right. The blue cast we can remove by setting the levels adjustment layer to the luminosity blend mode, and we'll see that blue cast now disappears from that shadow. Okay, in order to remove the rest of the background surrounding the truck, I'm going to use another adjustment. I'm going to use the solid color adjustment. Now I'm selecting the Only Web Colors option and then clicking in the top left hand corner of the color picker to select white as my color and then clicking OK. Now I'm going to transfer the mask from the underlying adjustment layer to this new adjustment layer. So we're just going to hold down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC and click and drag that into place. When we get the dialog saying Replace Layer Mask, we say Yes. Okay, now here's the truck but no shadow. The shadow is going to be restored in the next step. First we must locate where the shadow is just by lowering the opacity of this layer. I'll just lower it to around about 70%, and then we'll select the brush tool in the tools panel and I'm going to select black as the foreground color. If you press the D key and then the X key, we should have black as the foreground color now. I'm going to select a fairly hard brush. Here I'll just select it at 90% hardness, and we're working with 100%. And now I'm just going to enlarge the brush using the close square bracket key, 2 along from the letter P, and then just paint over the shadow in order to reveal that shadow at full density. Now, no accuracy is required while painting over this shadow. All we have to do is make sure that we paint over all of the edges. Now, don't proceed to paint over any areas that are not shadow, because those will be clipped to white when we restore the color fill layer to 100% opacity. Okay, now we've successfully removed all of the background except for the truck and its shadow. I'm now going to hold down the Shift key and click on that layer 0 so that all 3 layers are selected, and then use the keyboard shortcut on a Mac, Command G, on a PC, Control G, in order to put them into a group. And we can rename this group Truck and Shadow. Okay, now this is ready to transport into the new background. So we'll press the V key to access the Move tool, and then click and drag over to my tab which contains the new background, and then holding down the Shift key as I let go of the mouse, make sure that that is centered into the host image. Okay, we're now going to duplicate this truck and shadow group, so just right click on the group and choose Duplicate Group, and we'll just call this one Truck. Okay, so I'll just modify that name and then select OK. We're also going to modify the name of the underlying group to Shadow. Now the shadow will be created, I'll just switch off the truck grouping, and we'll put the shadow grouping into the multiply blend mode. Okay, so we see the shadow appear in the new background. Now we have to restore the truck, but without the surrounding white background. So let's click on the visibility of that truck grouping. Let's expand that truck group, and we'll switch off the visibility of the top 2 layers, and we'll shift click on the layer mask. Okay, now we have the truck and its shadow, and we're going to actually group, or say link, the truck and the shadow groupings so that the 2 never separate and become out of alignment. Okay, so I've selected both, just held down the Shift key as I clicked the separate group there, and then click on the little link icon at the base of the layers panel to group them. Okay, now in order to create a consistent light source for this image, we've got the light source coming from the left in the background, and it's obviously coming from the right to cast the shadow over to this side. So I'm going to flip the image and its shadow so we have a consistent light direction for this project. So I'm going to come in with the free transform keyboard shortcut, Command T on a Mac or Control T on a PC, and then I'm going to right click and choose flip horizontal. Now I'm just coming just outside of the bounding box here, and just click and rotate just to straighten that truck. And we need that shadow coming outside of the host image, so I'm just going to move that truck over to the right hand side slightly. And then when we're happy with the position or location, then I can hit the return or enter key, or hit the commit transform icon in the options bar. Okay, now we're going to just modify the color and tonality of the truck so again it suits the host image. So I'm just going to come back to my layers panel and open up that top truck layer. I'm going to select the truck image and then come down and select a curves adjustment. Now we're going to need slightly darker shadows for the tires here to look consistent with the host image. So I'm just going to click on the on image tool and click and drag down on that tire to create a darker shadow tone there. And then we'll restore the midtones and highlight tones just by raising the gamma inside of that curve there. Now we can see it's flowing through to the image underneath. Now we can correct or contain this adjustment by either placing the grouping into normal mode instead of pass-through, or just by clicking on this little clipping icon which contains the adjustment to just the truck and not the background. Okay, we're going to make one more adjustment now, so I'll just return to the panel, the layers panel, and we're going to access another curves adjustment. Okay, this time I want to dull down the chrome here, which is a bit overly too bright for the host image. And so again, I'm just going to clip this adjustment to the truck underneath, and then I'm going to pull down the white point of that image. Now it's affecting the whole truck, and I just want it to affect the fender here. So I'm just going to come over to the masks panel and choose invert, or I could use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control I on a PC. Okay, now we're going to come over to the layers panel, make sure the mask is the selected item, select the brush tool by pressing the B key on the keyboard. We're going to select white as the foreground color. I'm going to reduce the brush hardness maybe to around 50%. Click in the options bar to dismiss that panel, and I'll just collapse the layers panel as I reduce the size of the brush and then paint over the bumper here or fender just to dull down those highlight information there. Okay, and that's a little bit more consistent with the image that we have now. Okay, I'm just going to return to the curves adjustment. I'm just going to adjust the white point of this truck slightly. Again, I'll just return to that curve, and I'll come down to the blue curve, and I'm just going to pull out a small amount of blue just to create a slightly warmer feel. Got a little bit of a green cast coming in, so I'm just going to go up to the red channel and raise the red slightly just to create a consistent white balance between the host image and the truck. Okay, now to finish off this project, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a shallow depth of field. I'll just pull this layers panel over to the left hand side so we can see what we're doing here, and just reduce the size of this panel. I'm going to select the background layer, and then I'm going to duplicate this background layer. Okay, and this is going to be my depth of field effect in this layer. And so the way we're going to achieve this is we're going to select a gradient tool. We're going to choose the black-white gradient, third one along. We're working with the linear, normal, at 100% opacity. And I'm just going to click just at the top of the shadow here and click and drag a small vertical line, holding down the shift key to constrain it to a perfect vertical, and then let go as we hit just those railings in the distance there. Okay, now I've just got to Command Z that. I need to be doing this into a layer mask, so I'm just going to add that layer mask and try that operation just one more time. Okay, click, drag, hold down the shift key and then let go. Okay, this layer mask or this gradient should appear in the layer mask, because this is going to tell the lens blur feature how quickly we want to fade off that focus. Okay, so select the image component of the layer rather than the mask, and then come up to the filter menu, come down to blur, and then come across to lens blur here, which is just below the Gaussian blur. Okay, now as the dialog opens, we need to select the source as the layer mask that we've just created and put that gradient in. This allows us to fade off that depth of field, and that's a controlled depth of field. It goes from focus to outer focus during the length of that gradient we created. Now if that's a little bit too much dropping of focus, we can control that just by winding the radius slider either to the right to decrease focus or to the left to restore some of the focus in the background. I'm going to settle with a value of 30 and then select OK. Okay, so that's dropped the focus of the background, which allows us to give the truck a little bit more of a presence inside of this image. Okay, we can also now fine-tune any masking. We should zoom in, for instance, and check that the edge quality of this mask is absolutely okay. We can at any time obviously come to the layer masks inside of the truck grouping and modify the edge quality if we have any of the old background pixels showing. This is absolutely fine, so there's no need to do any modifications in this instance. And I'll just zoom out to fit in view once again and collapse the panel.